Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today is the 4th episode of Tuesdays with Perry. So today we're going to be talking about the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago in Florida, the fallout from that, and also we're going to talk a little bit about the legacy of President Wilson that Perry had mentioned before, and also mentioned an article in the New York Times Magazine about the Claremont Institute. We're also going to talk about a couple other things, including where socialism came from. So let's get Perry on the line right now.
Hello.
Perry, welcome to the program.
Hey there, Rudy. How are you today?
We're good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Well, we're welcoming you back. We're welcoming you back with some very crazy news that's happened down there in Florida. The FBI raided Trump's residence down there, Mar-a-Lago, looking for papers and documents. So I'm going to ask you right off the bat, what exactly is going on down there? What did the FBI do? And what do you think the political fallout is?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you. It wasn't the FBI. It was Biden's SS stormtroopers. These are some of the, and I'm going to use the word criminals, that Biden, by way of Obama, have strategically over the years put into positions in the bureaucracy, or what I like to call the apparatus, a very Soviet term, for this very purpose. This has been done. They've been purging the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, and now they're purging the DOD of true patriots, true men and women who love, respect, and revere the Constitution, and replace them with stormtroopers like those who invaded Mar-a-Lago a week ago tomorrow. And the reason for this, and by the way, they failed miserably. The reason for this was to try and humiliate the Trump family, which they failed, and furthermore, scared the GOP into being convinced not to accept a candidacy of Trump to run a second, or actually a third time, for president. And none of this has worked. Why do I say that? You and I both know. First of all, they shocked they shopped judges so that they could find the perfect tool to write a nondescript edict to go in and just like a vacuum suck up any type of piece of paper that had anything to do with the Trump presidency.
Do you think this judge was compromised in any way? He did have connections to the Epstein case.
Well, it's not just the Epstein case. He's been a contributor to multiple presidential campaigns of the Democrat Party. He is a tool of the Democrat Party even before he became a magistrate. And more importantly than that, he has spoken outwardly against Trump going all the way back to 2015. He has even used the term Nazi to describe Trump and people like Trump to be Nazis.
And why was a magistrate judge, that's kind of a low level, why was he selected to do the warrant, to approve the warrant?
Because they could get him to write the exact warrant they wanted.
So he was controlled.
Which was nondescript.
Maybe not compromised, but controlled.
Absolutely.
They're willing participants.
No question.
They're willing participants.
Oh, absolutely. Look, they've been using this going all the way back to B.J. Clinton and Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
And that's when I started taking notice of how corrupt our federal government was becoming. Yeah. That was 30 years ago. And it's only gotten worse with every Democrat administration.
So what happens next politically? What's the fallout from this on the left and on the right? What do you think the left is going to be saying? What do you think the right the right is saying, but there are all these calls about, hey, you got to tone down the violent rhetoric. What do you think's happening or going to happen on the left and the right going forward? And also include this affidavit, which is the key to all this, is still sealed. So how does this all play out, Perry?
Well, let's talk with the affidavit first. Why is it still sealed? If it's that obvious that this was an action that was absolutely mandatory to be taken on behalf of the national security of the United States of America. Number one, why is this affidavit still sealed where people, even in the intelligence committees of both the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives, still unable to get a copy of it? That's number one. Number two, why wasn't that warrant, when supposedly served and requested on behalf of Donald J. Trump by his attorneys, why was it denied them? Why is it still denied them? Okay. And lastly, why is it, if this was in the interest specific to the national security of the United States of America, and this warrant was issued on a Friday, why did it take until the following Monday to be executed?
He was out of town. Yeah.
So, right. So, spare me how much you care about me as a citizen of this country and the security of my country, Attorney General.
Yeah. So where do we?
Time for you. Yeah.
Where do we go from here? What happens on the left and the right? The left keeps saying, "Hey, GOP, tone down the rhetoric. You're looking for violence and all this stuff." What are we going to hear from the left and the right moving forward surrounding this? Because that affidavit won't be unsealed until after the election, I would imagine.
Probably. I would tend to agree with you. The only thing that would change that is an outcry from the general public. Right. But let's first take on the question you asked with regard to rhetoric. Notice how all the apparatchiks in the American media complex keep looking for ways to call us Nazis. We're anything but patriotic. We're anti-Semitic. We're racist. These are all the people that are speaking out against the Biden administration. They project this image onto us. And why do they do that? Because it covers up their intentions. Now, let's shift that for a second over to the GOP. And as you said, what is it most in the GOP? I mean, with the exception of people like Jim Jordan and Ted Cruz, and believe it or not, even little Marco is starting to get, some uppityness in him now. Yeah. Part of it is because he's running for re-election, of course. Right. But the point being is, with few exceptions, and certainly not from the hierarchy of the GOP with regard to those who hold elected office, such as Steve Scalise and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. I mean, McCarthy did say a couple of things this week, and I'm glad to hear it, but that was the least I would have expected from him. Okay. What are they saying? They're basically saying, let's keep our powder dry. Yeah. For what? So on one hand, you see those on the left who hold elected office trying to placate their base, which are all of these far left thinking people, the people like AOC and the squad. They're playing to them to try and keep them calm, while on our side we're being told, keep your powder dry. Don't give in to them. Don't give them the ability to say, see, that's what they're like. Well, you know what? At a certain point, you can see the whites of their eyes, and you don't keep your powder dry when you can see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah.
I can see the whites of their eyes.
Yeah. So what are you suggesting? I mean,
well,
you're not calling for violence, are you?
Oh, of course not. But what I expect from the leadership of my party is I expect starting with Ron McDaniel and ending with our leaders in the House and Senate and all those who fall down underneath that leadership. I expect them to be taken to the microphones. I expect them to be demanding answers. I expect them to not shut up. And when they get invited onto the Talking Head Sunday shows, don't allow the talking heads to dictate to them what they're going to talk about. You do the same thing we do when those same talking heads on national platforms during national campaigns ask a question that is irrelevant. We sidestep it.
Yeah.
You say, I'll answer that question, but before I do that, I'm going to make a statement.
Right.
And these are the things we have to do because we know what we're up against. And what that is more than just one party who is diametrically opposed to the American way of life.
Yeah.
We are up against them. We are up against the constructs of the Democrat Party, which is in total control of the federal government. And look what they just passed this week with not one Republican vote. And yet at the same time, prior to the United States Senate passing this boondoggle, what did Lindsey Graham say? We're going to make them pay for it. Well, I'm sorry, Lindsey. How'd you make them pay for it?
Yeah.
Instead of them passing it last Friday, they got to pass it on Sunday. They're crowing about it.
Yeah.
You didn't accomplish anything, Lindsey.
It's a victory. They keep calling it a victory for Joe Biden.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, so I want to switch gears here because we've been talking a lot about the establishment and the state, the deep state, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and the current established condition of the state, the federal government in particular. But last week, I believe it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, you talked about Wilson's political legacy, President Wilson. And I was reading an article just recently in the New York Times Magazine, and that magazine had an article called Right Minds, the Claremont Institute helped shape a Trumpian vision for American conservatism. The revolution it started is far from being finished. And this is, I don't know if you know much about the Claremont Institute, but they talk a lot about Wilson's legacy and certain things that transformed the United States. And basically, Wilson was the one who began to erect this deep state, this established federal government that was full of, lifers, lifelong workers for the federal government who, I guess the strategy was by Democrats is to keep Democrats in the permanent positions of power, and then the elected officials, the elected politicians would just carousel through. They'd change, but the deep state would always stay the same. In this article, they referred to the Claremont Institute and helped shape a Trumpian vision, but they didn't talk about the Republic being, or the new Republicans as being as an organic phenomenon that grew out of people just loving the country, the way the country was formed and its founding principles. What does Wilson have to do? What did President Wilson have to do with erecting the beginning structure of this deep state?
Well, there were several things that Wilson accomplished. One of them was the fact that he re-segregated the armed forces of the United States of America. Most people don't know that. He was a bigot. He was a racist, and he didn't think, nor did his miscreants in his party think, that blacks and whites should be serving the country together in an integrated force. Most people don't know that. That was one thing he did. Another thing that he did was he pushed for, and he got the, again, I should have checked my amendments on this. I think it was the 15th Amendment, which had to do with making it possible for the federal government, for the first time ever, to institute an income tax. And one of the ways he and his party sold this to the American people, and I want you to remember this, how it correlates to Biden right now. Wilson said, the American people have nothing to worry about this income tax because it's not going to affect 99% of you. We are only going to tax the robber barons. We are only going to tax the people making, and I don't want to say this with precise accuracy, $1 million a year.
Right, but that was at a time where there was a lot of antipathy towards the so-called robber barons, the really rich millionaires at the time. They would be billionaires today.
Correct. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Mellons, what
Astor,
happened? And Astor was another one. And so Wilson used class warfare as a way to get this amendment pushed through, because the United States Constitution forbade that from ever happening. So you have to amend the Constitution, and then they did. Prior to that, it was excise taxes that basically funded the government. Yes. And so this was the beginning of the Internal Revenue Service. Now, fast forward to FDR, and I'll just cover this very briefly. FDR grew the size of the bureaucracy, and he justified it. And of course, there were changes in taxation and what have you. And now, let's move it to Obama from 12 years ago. Obama
targeting conservatives. Yep,
targeting conservative nonprofit groups, by the way.
Yep.
Okay. Something else I want to talk about Obama, and it really has little to do with the IRS, but this is something that people have forgotten. He had what's known as a car czar. Remember this guy, Rifkin? Okay. This guy came in and he single-handedly decided what dealerships for GM and Chrysler would remain in business and which ones wouldn't. With the case of Ford said, no, we're not going to take any money from the federal government.
Right.
They were forced to ultimately, but they paid it right back.
That was under TARP,
so,
right?
Correct. That's right, under TARP. And so now I watched how individual, generational car dealerships, very successful car dealerships in Central Florida, were told, you are to close your doors in 60 days. We will not take back your inventory. You will have to liquidate. And that was the end of it. Yeah. We lost tens of thousands of jobs around the country because some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. deemed them irrelevant. Who were they? They were Republican donors.
Right.
They were singled out because they were Republican donors.
So let me connect the dots here, and I'll let you finish. So the administrative state was started with the socialist plank of income tax, because if folks didn't know, one of the pillars of socialism is in fact the income tax, and with the administrative state could use the funds to function and grow, but also as a way to levy against its political opponents. And that's what we're seeing now. So you could continue with that thought.
Correct. So now let's move from Obama now to Biden. What was it that Biden said to the American people, both directly and indirectly through his miscreants of his cabinet? These 89,000 additional IRS agents are not being hired for the purpose of coming after you, mom, pa, kettle. Mm-hmm. We are going after the uber rich. Now I'm paraphrasing. We are going after the uber rich because they don't pay their fair share, which of course you and I both know.
Sounds
they
like
pay
Wilson.
More than
right.
half all the federal taxes.
Yeah.
Sounds like Wilson. Correct. What we call Wilsonian. Okay, and we both know, Rudy, that that's not where the money is. The money isn't with Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or Steve Jobs' widow. It's with the little people like you, me, and the small business people that have anywhere between 5 and 120 employees.
And these people tend not to donate politically in large sums, so they're easy targets because you're not going to offend any donors by targeting Middle America.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I learned 30 years ago from a dear friend of mine who was connected to 3 Republican White Houses, by the way. Okay. She once told me the difference between Republicans and Democrats, and I'm talking about 30 years ago, is that Republicans walk in the front door and talk to the 2 owners of a small business that houses 100 employees, and they get $100 from each of the 2 owners. The Democrats go in the back door, talk to all the people with their name emblazoned on their lapel. I'm sorry, on their breast pocket.
Right.
And they get $20, $10 or $20 from each one of the 100 people. And so what I'm getting at here is, don't kid yourself. The Democrats know how to raise money from both the little people who can't afford to give more than $10, which is very important, by the way, because if you look at how Trump ran his first 2 campaigns,
that's how he did
in 16 and 20, where did his money come from? It came from people giving less than $75.
Yeah. But it's the policies, because then the Democrats get rich on the back end too, because they raise everybody's taxes, and so they get more money for their administrative state that way. So they get you coming and going.
That's right. And for 40 years now, I've been saying to people who think unlike me when it comes to politics and love to see the federal government go after the doctors, the lawyers, the wealthy businessmen, and they feel good about the rich, so-called rich, getting taxed up their wazoo. And I've always said this, and now I'm 61 years old. Tell me something. How is that individual being taxed to death making your life better?
Doesn't.
Now, when you can answer that, then I'll believe you. Right. But by them being taxed more, that doesn't help you. That only feeds the monster known as bureaucracy.
Yeah, but they raise their prices, or they stop hiring. There are other economic effects from being overtaxed. I want to switch gears once again, and I want to go to the origins of this whole mess of, I believe, the administrative state and the bloated government, bloated federal government, and the centralization of power in those hands is socialism to begin with. Now, you might have some you probably don't, but some people out there might have some fond views of socialism. But I want to ask you, Perry, where did this all start? And I'm sure some people out there have read the Communist Manifesto, and I want to just also state that one of the authors of the Communist Manifesto, Frederick Engels, was in fact a manufacturing business owner. He owned a big industrial business, and he didn't sell that till well after his father died. So I just want to say Frederick Engels was an industrialist who, with Marx, came up with socialism. But I want to ask you, where do you think this idea of socialism came from? And do you think it's philosophically opposed to, in America, in the Constitution, in the founding? I have my own thoughts on that, but where did this political ideology that's usurping our Constitution, the United States, and much of the world, where did this all come from?
It came from Europe. It's not American in base at all. It's a European construct. And the reason for that is because the United States is a unique country. It was formulated by men who did not want to create a government similar to anything that existed at the time in Europe. Our founding fathers took some of the bits and pieces and improved on those measures of freedom. And that's what created our founding documents, beginning with the Declaration, and then, of course, the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and what have you.
So you're referring to like the Magna Carta and English, a lot of English common law, and which was weird, which after the French Revolution, they almost were trying to erect something that was opposed to that. So is that where socialism came from? Was it the French Revolution? Because a lot of people think it's the Jacobins.
Well, I think it was call it a watershed moment. It's probably unfair, but I'm going to, for the sake of this conversation, call it just that. The French Revolution was a watershed moment that ushered in, decades later, what we now know as socialism. And in order for that to happen, you have to go and read the Communist Manifesto and notice what things have to be attacked in order for that type of political thinking, philosophy to thrive. And when you do that and you look at what they have accomplished since the 1930s here in this country, you begin to realize exactly how much they've accomplished and why we, and I'm talking specifically about conservative and libertarian thinkers, why we are today the modern day Conestoga wagon train that is now in a circle and being bombarded from all points. Yeah. We have been encircled. It doesn't mean we're going to lose. It just means we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah. In my personal opinion, I think socialism is a controlled opposition movement. I think the rich at the time, when the merchant class began to form governments outside of monarchies, is they realized that the revolution that overthrew the monarchies was going to come for them at some point, the so-called robber barons and the merchant class. And so I believe they developed this as a controlled opposition. As of course you're going to be envious and hateful of people with wealth, and so they're going to sell them this pipe dream that if there's some sort of egalitarian equality, that somehow that they will miss, well, that they will be rewarded for their lot in life or what have you. So I just, my whole thing with socialism is I just believe it's a construct, and that there's no light at the end of that tunnel. Do you know what I mean, Perry? That it's a pipe dream that has never succeeded. So do you believe it's a conspiracy? And do you think that people, that just common people without a lot in life, do you think they should be worried about socialism? Because it seems like it's just a concern of the upper middle class. What do you think everybody at every walk of life should be concerned about socialism?
I think everyone, regardless of where they fit in the class structure, should be concerned. But the fact of the matter is, only two classes are: those at the top and those who strive to get to the top, meaning the great middle class. We have our lower middle class, hourly wage earners that make a good living, your tradesmen and what have you. We have our professional middle class that wear a collared shirt and a tie, your doctors, your lawyers, your business people. And then we have the wealthy above us. And it's very interesting about the wealthy because most of those, up until recently, meaning the last 25, 30 years, most of those in the wealthy class, unless they were born into wealth, always wanted people to do well, because the better the middle and lower classes did, the better the wealth of those in the top strata would increase. But it's changed in the last 30 years. And the reason for that is our professorial elite. They have managed now in the last 3 to 5 decades to raise all these red diaper doper babies, as Michael Savage used to call them, who they want to do well, they want to be successful. You look at the power brokers of Google and how they have gobbled up all these startup IT companies so that they don't have any competition. Facebook, another one. And yet where do they go with their money? They go socialist. Why is that? Because of how they were raised and how they have been indoctrinated. And yeah, they've learned how to be successful in business, and business school has taught them that. But it's also taught them, in order to be a good person, you have to think socialist. Yeah. You have to think socialist. You have to want to make a socialism structured type of economy. And that's what's so scary about the world we find ourselves in now.
Yeah. It seems just seems hypocritical, but it feeds into the thoughts that I always had that socialism is a conspiracy, and you can find evidence throughout time that the rich were funding socialist projects, including in Russia and in China and in a number of other places. And it seems to me that now they're like ripping the mask off, that they were funding socialist projects before, but now they're ripping the mask off and they're saying, yeah, we support socialism because it's better for you. Not necessarily better for us, but it's better for society. And that's where you start to get into social engineering. And these people have always been about science and eugenics and all these things, and it seems like it fits right in. So it seems to me like the rich have always been supporting socialism, but now that the mask just keeps coming off, the mask seems to be coming off. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't like to throw all of the people who are in the class of the rich into one pot.
Well, of course not. No, I don't mean to generalize. I'm just saying that,
right.
The Rockefellers were supporting Hitler, and, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not, and there was a little known thing called the Macy Commission that they were studying how post-monarchical governments, how they were reacting to dictators and to centralized power and all these different things. So it doesn't really boggle the mind when you think that the ultra rich, and I don't mean to generalize about people who are wealthy. Again, I'm not against all people who are wealthy. It has to do with, your physical or your philosophical discipline and how you see, things being better for people. Do you think if you get, it's the old Bible adage, if you can give a man a fish or you could teach a man to fish, whatever those two things you believe in. So.
Correct. I think there's a correlation between the idle rich who support all of these socialist utopian thinking programs and those that institute those programs. They kind of feed off of each other. And let's look at Princess Pelosi for a second. How is it that she and her husband, Paulie, the drunk, are capable of being able to pick winners and losers on Wall Street better than even the best Wall Street prognosticators.
Yeah, insider
like
info. Yeah, and it's perfectly legal. Yeah.
And well, actually, it's not legal. It's interesting because when the Republicans were in control of the Congress back during the Bush 43 administration, Boehner actually changed that so that there had to be accountability.
Yeah.
If you were going to be a member of Congress, no one in your staff, no member of your staff, nor you, nor an immediate family member could take advantage of what you knew behind closed doors in the United States government. That is still on the books. But whoever is Speaker of the House has the option to choose whether or not they wish to enforce it or not. So Nancy Pelosi simply chooses, just like the federal government, just like all the Soros-based district attorneys, they choose what laws they want and do not want to enforce. And that is the reason why Paulie the drunk has managed to accumulate all this wealth off of his knowledge of Wall Street, where to invest his money and where not to.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is how they do it.
Yeah.
They manipulate the system to benefit themselves.
Right.
Why else would an 82-year-old woman like Nancy Pelosi want to stay in a filthy, crack-ridden city like Washington, D.C., when she can live in the vineyards of Napa?
Yeah.
She's there because she wants the power and the prestige and money that comes with it. And that's what's going on.
Yeah, and that's what people have to understand is that socialism centralizes power. Centralized power benefits the few that are centralized in the power epicenter. So whether it's Washington or the Politburo or the Communist Party, then they decide, once you're in the centralized power arena, then you can decide how the laws are prosecuted, or if they're prosecuted and against whom. And obviously upper party members, not always, but upper party members are always treated with kid gloves unless they do something against the party, and then they could, Kafka-esque make up whatever kind of thing they want and go after you, just like they're going after Trump. So just to bring this around, you said that. Just to bring this around a full circle, this is what power plays are, is that, and this is what centralized power is. There's a problem with it, is because then you have all the power brokers deciding who stays, who goes, and if you're not along with the agenda, and that's where we get with the full eugenics and the full conspiracy, is you're either along with the agenda, you're either on the in or you're on the out. And so, as Ned Beatty said in Shooter, you're either on the in or you're on the out.
On the out. And that is exactly why, to bring this conversation full circle, as you said, Mar-a-Lago happened last week, because who's the threat to the status quo? It's Trump. Trump is the only politician in our lifetime who cannot be bought. Now, granted, Reagan couldn't be bought, but Reagan didn't have his own money.
Yeah.
And Reagan didn't have the social ability. He was a much better communicator than Trump could ever dream of being.
Of course.
But he didn't have the social ability to reach out to the common man the way Trump has done.
Build a populist movement.
And that is the threat. You hit it right on the head. That is the threat to Washington on both sides of the political aisle. And that's why the Republican Party is not speaking out in total, is not speaking out about the incredible miscarriage of justice that took place 7 days ago.
Yeah, because
why.
You know what the opposite of elitism is? It's populism.
I'm listening.
It's populism.
Right.
And that's the problem with all this, is that like the Claremont Institute and the Tea Party and all the people that took the old ideas of the country's founding, most particularly liberty, because they like to talk about all different things. I'm talking about liberty, and so are many people on the right. Individual liberty is that idea that's been percolating in the Tea Party and in the Claremont Institute and in other, let's call them right-wing think tanks. All great, the Heritage Foundation. People have to understand is that Trump took that and made it populist. So it's not Trumpism. The Claremont Institute didn't shape Trumpism. Trumpism is a long borne out idea of America that Trump was able to take all this intellectualism and all the intellectualism on the right and all the political philosophy on the right and the founding of the country and what all that means, the benefits of the Enlightenment, what all that means. And he was able to take it and make it populist. So as soon as he started pointing his fingers at entrenched Washington and the administrative state, the deep state and the swamp and all these things, is he got people invested in this preservation of liberty. And all this stuff you hear about violence is they're worried about reactionaries. They keep on talking about right-wing extremists as being radical. It's just the opposite of that. Is that
that's right.
Your progressive policies are creating a reaction. Everybody on the right is traditionalist. They want to keep things more or less the same. And then you have these crazy ideas. And what you're doing is you're provoking a reaction from reactionaries.
Right. But Rudy, let's also point out one other fact, and that is, let's look at all the acts of violence, political acts of violence that have taken place domestically in the last 8 years. Yeah. Where do they come from?
The radicals.
They haven't come from the right.
Well, they always come from the radicals.
From the radical left.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
And
I was going to say Steve Scalise wasn't shot by a member of the Ruby Ridge militia.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Now, so let's understand how they project their tools
right.
And onto us and call us the extremists.
Right. And I'm very
important.
I'm very suspect. I'm very suspicious about this guy who supposedly stormed the FBI office in Ohio. But we got to leave it there, Perry. I really appreciate you coming again. We're going to see you next week. This has been a great learning experience. We ran a little long, but talking about all the things we're passionate about, including the love of this country. Thanks a lot, Perry. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate the time with you.
Yeah. See ya. That was really interesting. Listening to Perry. Great to talk to him. Gave us some insight onto what's going on down there at Mar-a-Lago with the FBI, the federal government, the Republicans, and Donald Trump. Also learning a little bit about the legacy of President Wilson, how America got the federal income tax, and of course socialism, where it all began. All right, that's it for me, Rudy's Revelation. We'll see you tomorrow, regular program. See you.